Look, I'll be really honest with the listeners of the personal finance world is I really think it's easy to paint a beautiful picture
Sure.
of financial independence and having enough security and money that once you have that, you can just live a beautiful life. But we're still facing life, right? We all have
Yeah.
problems. We all have stuff we're working on.
Welcome back to the Time Freedom Podcast, where you can learn how to rethink your work and your money to create a life you love right now. Join us for insights to help you find meaningful freedom so you can choose how and when and with whom you work for as long as you want. Here are your hosts, me, Brian Harriott, and Kirby Dennison. Today on the podcast, we welcome Rebecca Herbst. Rebecca reached financial independence at the age of 32, and she left her corporate job in commercial real estate shortly thereafter. She is the founder of Yield and Spread, a nonprofit that promotes personal finance as a force for good. She teaches the ins and outs of investing and financial planning, but with a greater goal to encourage people to give back and help others. Today, I'm excited to let everyone know that we have Rebecca Herbst joining us. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So we didn't know each other from a long time ago. I actually just heard Rebecca on the Money with Katie show, and I loved the episode. And I thought, oh, this is some really interesting things to talk about. They talked a lot about giving, charitable giving, especially once you've reached financial independence. And I think we just had a couple messages back and forth on LinkedIn, and I'm like, hey, I need to get you on our podcast. So I'm very excited to have you here.
Yeah, me too.
So one of the things that we do before we talk about the real meat of the episode is kind of a unconventional question, which is, what is something that few people know about you? And so I'll pose that question for you, Rebecca, and then Kirby and I can also add ours as well.
Most of my appearances on podcasts and the media have been around fire and giving. I tend to talk a lot about generosity and giving. Most people don't know I was a high school and collegiate athlete. I was a rower,
Nice.
in boats with oars. And I did that pretty competitively. So I would say it's an interesting transition going from being such like an intense athlete in life, quite type A, to living an early retiree lifestyle, which is a little more type B for me
Yeah.
sometimes.
So you were you were one of those. I went to University of Wisconsin and lived in, I don't remember the name of the dorm, but it was right on the water. And I would hear those crewers in the morning doing all that stuff, thinking, man, I'm so glad that's not me. That was you?
Yeah, and Wisco has a great program. They had a great program then, and they do have a great program now, and a bunch of girls from my team actually went to Wisconsin to row.
Oh,
So
nice.
maybe that's who is out there. I'm an early bird, though. It doesn't bother me. I like to wake up.
And I am too now, but I guess I wasn't in college. But here, I'm
Mhm.
going to go next because I just thought of the thing few people know about me. I probably should have done rowing or something when I went to college, because what few people know about me is that I did not gain the freshman 15 when I went to college. I gained the freshman 40 and went way up, and then have come back down. But when I went home for Thanksgiving, my grandma looked at me and said, Brian, you're looking fuller. I'm like, oh,
It's
grandma,
always the
I love you.
grandmas. The
I love
grandmas
you.
just say whatever they want.
So
They
that's
do.
mine. All right, Kirby, what do you have?
Grandmas are much like toddlers. They just say what comes to
Yeah,
mind. So
exactly.
I guess I will follow the college trend. What most people don't know about me was I was a college cheerleader. So
Oh,
Oh.
really? What sport?
we cheered for all of them.
Oh, small college then. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At junior college.
Kirby and I have worked together for almost 2 years, and
Mhm.
I'm still surprised. Well, I suppose we should get into the real topic. But to start, Rebecca, could you just give the audience kind of an overview of who you are, what you do, and feel free to kind of talk more about your FI journey, your financial independence journey, because we're just looking to help our listeners get some more role models to learn how different ways different people are doing this, and I think they would find it interesting.
So I guess I'll lead with I'm a mom. I have a 2-year-old boy and one on the way, and I'm also a wife. So I have a wonderful husband, Joe, who is also an early retiree like me. And we currently live in Salt Lake City, Utah. We've been living in Utah for 5 years, but we just moved down to Salt Lake City, so we've been here for half the year. And so we're just exploring our new life in our new city. And it's been a real focus before this next chapter in our family life. In terms of the world of personal finance, I run a small nonprofit called Yield and Spread. And we're on a mission to promote finance as a force for good. So the idea being, if you can really get your finances together, you're in a great place to not only optimize your own life, but also to help others. So I call it a win-win. And I often apply the teachings that I've learned from my life in the financial independence world and apply it to thinking about how we can be more thoughtful with our money and be good members of society and what it means to build a meaningful legacy. So and I'm doing quotes since you can't see me doing that. I guess I early retired. It's over 6 years ago now. Both me and my husband around the same time in our early 30s. So I think this is quite rare.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, quite rare that both people do it, I think, at the same time. And I came from a background in commercial real estate. My husband, a computer programmer, so we had pretty decent paying jobs. And I don't think we ever planned to pull the early retirement trigger that early, but it just kind of happened, and we could talk more about that journey as well. But slowly and surely, we've kind of been learning to build this life around all this free time we have, although now with toddlers, it doesn't feel that way. And trying to balance all these things, like running a nonprofit, designing a life we love, doing all the finance stuff. And so I'm here, I'm in the thick of it.
It's so, I guess, interesting. Not interesting's not the right word. Intriguing. Like, so you hear on the outside, oh, I've achieved financial independence at whatever what was it in 2020 at this young age. My life is
I'm
then gonna be
32.
boring.
It's okay. No, I'm 38, but it was at 32. I'm okay
32,
sharing my
got it.
age, right?
Okay, all right, good. And I'm like, you think, okay, well, then you're just going to have this chill life.
Mm-hmm.
But no, you're still doing all the things, that makes living,
Mm-hmm.
having the new family and all of those things. And that's where I always had a challenge too, because I wanted to do early retirement. It's just that I moved to the high cost of living city right
Mm-hmm.
away and had that kid. And then I also really wanted this cabin, which cost money. And then all of a sudden I'm like, there's no way I can early retire because I just have too many expenses. And I don't think both my wife and I were not frivolous spenders. We just spent things on that we valued. And before we knew it, I'm like, I guess I'll be working. So I better find a job that I love. But you were also doing that. You just were able to hit it early and then kind of flip.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I'll be really honest with the listeners of the personal finance world. Is I really think it's easy to paint a beautiful picture
Sure.
of financial independence and having enough security and money that once you have that, you can just live a beautiful life. But we're still facing life, right? We all have problems. We all have stuff we're working on. And so I think the type of message that you echo, which is like exploring some of these things now versus waiting till this obscure point in time or this obscure portfolio number to start living life is important to iterate. Because I will say, like things aren't perfect. My life is wonderful. I feel very blessed and lucky, but it takes a long time to design a life you love.
Yeah, and it changes because you go through different stages and different things are of different importance to you at different times.
Exactly.
Your journey to achieving financial independence, if I have this right, is you kind of just recognized that you were kind of close when the idea came. So it's not as though you sacrificed and cut back on things extra hard for 15 years and then retired early. That's not your experience, and it hadn't been mine either. It is. Do I have that right? And then you kind of achieved it. Is that right? Or do you mind sharing maybe a little bit more of the financial part of the story so that people
the
can
building blocks.
Yeah.
So that's generally the gist. There is a lot of luck here. For me, the real thing was I didn't know that there were other options, right? I just thought that you worked and that work was your value, and that at some point, maybe at 65, after a successful career, whatever that means, that you get to retire, right? Like that's everyone in
Yep.
my life.
Mhm.
People work
Me
hard,
too.
whether you have a lot of money or whether you don't have a lot of money, you just work hard. So I didn't even remotely understand these concepts. There were some other things that were pretty baked into my life already. Like I was a very naturally frugal person from a young age. I was quite scared to spend money on big ticket items. So I was always had this decent savings rate. I just wasn't doing anything super productive with my money. And so once I began to learn about the concepts of just like the fundamentals of personal finance, like basic stuff, invest your money, leverage a 401k, leverage an IRA. By the way, I went to a great school in New England. No one taught us any of this. And then I went to a great job, and at my first job out was at IBM. And then I went to commercial real estate, surrounded by smart people. And then all of a sudden it was like, "Oh, I can't really ask anyone what a stock is. That would be way too
Oh,
embarrassing when I'm helping this
oh,
private equity firm invest in multi-million-dollar portfolios across the East Coast, right? Too embarrassing to ask what a stock is. So I was definitely in that trap. So when I really learned about personal finance, I just went deep in on the math stuff. And then I didn't think as much about the life stuff, which is what this podcast is about. So by the time I reached financial independence, and I want to clarify that, like, I think this is a moving target number, but like roughly like way beyond the stages of Coast Fi, and we could define that, but way beyond the stages of Coast Fi, very close to like 4 or 5 years away from probably some sort of reasonable Fi number. I was already there, but I just hadn't been thinking about what life could look like.
I just thank you for being like just very real about it. I think what I heard in there too, which I found in my situation too, is it's so fluid. Sure, if we moved to a small town in the Midwest, we would be 100% financially independent, but we just don't want to do that right now. And so then does that mean that I'm not financially independent? I
Yeah.
guess it doesn't.
And I really respect that because I mean, this happened to me personally. So maybe like I'm projecting what you're saying onto me is I did move to a city that was a low cost of living city. And part of me did really want to move there and live there and start a new life with my
Mhm.
husband. But I would be lying if I didn't say it was a nice idea that we could buy a single family home for $300,000 there. And it turned out that wasn't really the right choice for us. And so
Mhm.
I see people all the time in these high cost of living cities, and I don't blame them, like looking for these alternative paths to get to fight closer, but then they're like leaving family and friends that they love
Yeah.
and a life that they love. And so I kind of, if anyone ever wants to talk about that, I kind of have made that choice and then backed out of it because it wasn't the right
Mhm.
choice for me and my family. And so
It,
now we're kind of like maybe not fully fi because we did move back to a high cost of living area.
it's balancing all the pieces, I feel like. And actually the one that I really would love to talk more about has to do with the children. And thank you also for
Mm,
coming on the podcast. I know you're quite pregnant and we had to get this in quick, which is great, which we can do.
I'm
um,
here.
but a lot of, I've been listening to the FI stuff for a long time. And of course, the first argument is, well, yeah, when you're making double high earning incomes and you have no kids, of course you can reach FI. And then
Hmm.
there's the conversation of, well, then how do you achieve FI when you have a family? And then there are people talking about that too. And so you're like on this kind of a path where you had achieved FI without children and now you're having children. Tell me about that decision and how do you think that's going to impact how you look at financial independence?
Yeah. So let me talk about parenthood and then let me talk about the order.
Yeah.
So my husband, Joe, he was the one who pioneered the idea of let's leave our jobs so that we could be parents fully and present.
Mhm.
He is a confident parent. I am not a confident parent. I love my son and I'm very excited for this next baby, but I have never been like, it's my place on earth to be a parent. It's
Mhm.
something that I've really had to work at and grow into. So that's just a very vulnerable comment from me. And so like, if you had asked me 10 years ago when I was working full time in this high powered job, like, would you leave your work to be a mom? I probably would have been like, I'd probably take some maternity leave and then go back to work. I think that's probably the lifestyle that's right for me, if I'm just being candid. But then when I had my son 3 months in, I was like, I cannot believe people are going back to work. Like, after 3 months, whereas some parents do want to go back to work. Some parents want longer, right? It's whatever's right for you. But I know that I had these options then of making that choice. I think the idea of, look, if you're not fully financially independent, but you want to spend more time with your children, being in a place of financial security to make that choice, whether it's go back to work part-time, full-time, seasonal work, all the options, what have you, get some help with the child rearing, whatever that looks like. Or, you have alternative options too. So the thing is, like, I feel like I have flexibility and I have options around that. Now, does that make the choice easier in terms of how much time I spend on yield and spread versus with my son, or how much of the parenting load does my husband take? But I will certainly say that I see the people around me, and I know that Joe and I are really lucky to be able to work on this together and to be parents together. That said, we're very, very, very far away from families. I really think we need each other in this space too. So I'll lead with kind of those parenting comments. I think the finances behind it are interesting. I'm still a little of the mindset of, kids don't have to be as expensive as everyone makes them out to be. Maybe that is unfair of me to say, and maybe that's a little biased, but I will say there are certain choices that I feel like you can make around childcare, around what you buy for your children, around how you house them and shelter them. Do they share rooms? What sort of belongings they have, what sort of activities they have. I do think there's a huge spectrum in terms of how expensive kids can be, and I see that playing out. Obviously, there's some non-negotiables here if you need daycare or childcare, but even then there is some fluidity.
I don't know, Kirby, you were nodding a lot, like with the story about going back to work and stuff. I'm just curious your perspective.
Yeah, I think that, for me, when I started my career, I was the opposite. I was definitely one that was like, I just want to stay home with the kids. Then I had the kids and I was
Mhm.
like, I could not stay home with them all the time until I had actually my son, who's our third. And it was that when I took maternity leave, then was the first time that I ever was complete maternity leave. I worked part time through the first two leaves, and I was a lender. It was renewal season. Like,
Mm,
I had obligations, or I felt like I had obligations. And so it was really the first time that I realized how much I was missing out on. So after him, that's when I really was like, there's a lot here that we're leaving on the table with time with the kids and all those experiences. And then, so that's when I went into entrepreneurship. And then actually, when you were talking about like you and Joe working together with the, balancing of the childcare, my husband now works from home as well. So we're both in the house, and just being able to have the ebbs and flows, because there's weeks that
mhm.
I'm busier, with my stuff, and there's weeks where he's busier. And so you kind of do have a little bit more flexibility than if you were in a 9 to 5. And it kind of sounds like the same, with your nonprofit as well, that you probably experienced something similar.
Right. And then we get all the questions of, like, because then you're steering your own ship, right? So you're like, how much time do I want to be working versus how much time do I want to be parenting? Because it's the choice is then on you. And that's
You have
actually
the
not an
choice.
easy thing to navigate, right? The choice is
Mhm.
good, but also sometimes more choice is more mental load.
And when we were preparing for the interview, you asked a question over email about like, how does this time freedom thing work when you do have two little kids? And I admit my first reaction was, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, shoot.
And there's reasons for it. Like our friends Charlie and Angie, they told me they had this line where they call it the dark years when you have two kids under 3. Like you just kind of survive, and then you come up and go, what happened over those first couple of years? But I've since thought about that since yesterday. And I think it comes down to what you think time freedom is. Just like you think, what do you think financial independence is? Time freedom, just like financial independence, isn't just like, oh, I'm going to chill out and relax. No, no, no. I think it just means you have the choice, the optionality, like you were just saying, Rebecca, to choose to start the family and be able to spend time and have both of us do it or whatever it looks like. So it's that's my new thought. Not just that it doesn't apply.
Right, and having some grace that maybe we just don't actually have time freedom because we have toddlers. So it's there, we
Yes.
have time freedom ready for us a couple years from now, but we don't actually have time freedom today.
Yes. Yes, and when you said that, it just reminded me that I had also shared with you that ahead of the podcast that my father and my stepmom moved from Colorado to California to help us when our son was young for a variety of reasons, and so thankful that they did that. The weird thing is, as the rest of the kids in our family have had kids, they've slowly moved to each of the cities where the youngest kid is
It's
born. It's kind of
incredible.
Isn't that
It's,
just
like,
wonderful? They didn't realize they
truly
were doing it,
incredible.
but yeah, it's wonderful. But he said, I remember one time I was coming in from in our back door. I remember specifically, it was right on the blue rug. He's like, it's because he was leaving and he's like, hey, you got to give yourself a break here, because it's going to get really busy. All this focus on this young being and other things in your life are going to have to give. And don't get upset about it. Just recognize that it's going to happen and it's only temporary. You'll be
Mhm.
able to come back to those things. And the specific one, which I think is funny, maybe because it's a dad and a kid, he's like, your yard is going to look like crap.
Oh, that actually
And I
really
said,
speaks to me. I keep getting I just before this podcast, I went, "Hun, the pergola's falling over."
ours is but the problem is we never came back to it. So our son's 14 and a half now, but our yard still looks
Yeah.
pretty bad. And to the point where my wife will pull in. She's like, I can't imagine what people think looking at our front yard. I'm like, you know what? Let's just keep it mowed and it'll be fine. We'll figure it out later. But again, like, yeah, we've chosen to spend our money on things that actually help us in the house. So like we have a really old and cold house. So we got a new gas fireplace installed so we can use it instantly. Like now that whole opens up the whole room and we enjoy it. But like doing the yard up nice in the front yard, we're not out there. So like we'll get to it eventually. It's fine. It's fine.
I just have a comment on the time freedom with toddlers. I
Yeah.
think I think it is an interesting season as I have a 3-year-old and boys are just unhinged. I will say that from the start. Girls are much easier. Um, and I think though that for me, like the time freedom aspect comes from back to the optionality of like you have the option to spend the time with them. And I actually just saw a video yesterday. It was like, I got nothing productive done. And yet the child was like, oh, I got to spend so much great time with my
Oh,
mom.
that's great.
So it is showing them also that they have options even at a young age because he's in that imprinting stage where this is his first reality of the world in the 0 to 2. So, and then I don't know,
And
I think that's special too.
can we change direction a little bit and talk more about the 1% pledge and some of the other ideas that you have around financial giving? Because I'm admittedly terrible at this, and I can tell you my reason why I think that is. But before I do, I want to let you, kind of explain how this came about, what your beliefs are here, and our listeners will quickly understand, hopefully, how I felt, which was like, wow, this has to be talked about way more.
Yeah, so let's maybe talk about the origins of my giving story. I wanna be clear that I didn't come from a family of givers. Like, I wasn't born into a family that liked to volunteer or give money away. They were very, very protective of their money. And so I came from a background, this wasn't like born into me. As I began my journey to financial freedom, and as I got closer to it, I felt this underlying current of why me? Like, why do I get to do this? And Brian, you mentioned earlier, right? Like, I kind of lucked out on this. I didn't have like a 15-year boring middle journey. And so it was nagging at me quite a bit. And the ideas of like how I could help others were weighing on me a lot. So I kind of explored these two concepts around the same time. Like, how am I pursuing financial freedom? What does that mean to me? And also, what does it mean to actually give back? And so I was reading a lot of books from different philosophers on theories on giving, where to give. And I came to the conclusions that, I could actually make a really big difference in the world if I select charities that are doing really, really good work to help others. And I could actually make a huge difference without having to be a billionaire or a millionaire. I could do it by donating something like a couple $1,000s a year. And so if you run like a financial simulation, like a Monte Carlo simulation on your own portfolios, Brian, Kirby, I'm sure you guys have done this, right? You'll know that maybe there's a 2% chance of failure and you'll end up with no money. But there's also a huge chance that you end up being a decamillionaire,
Uber
right?
rich.
Uber rich. And so when I started thinking about all these scenarios, it just kind of became a no-brainer to me that I should start a giving habit. And so I took something called a trial pledge, and we started with giving away 5% of our income each and every year. And then the plan was to kind of iterate on that. And 5% was so doable that I just kept iterating on it each and every year. And now my husband and I have both taken what's called this 10% pledge. And we give away 10% of our income every year. There's other options as well, but at this stage it works quite well for us. We also plan to donate a significant part of our net worth upon our death as well. But what I realized in taking some of these personal moves for myself, which I did not broadcast widely, because at the time I felt somewhat insecure. I don't want to come across as this like do-gooder, right? This is a personal choice I made. I don't want to push it on others. But as I became more and more involved in this community, I realized that when we talk about giving and generosity in the personal finance world, it's the conversations led with tax deductions, itemization.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but there isn't discussions around like how to give, how to come up with a habit for giving, how to come over a scarcity mindset. So I just started naturally filling that gap. And Yield and Spread, the org that I run, is what came of that. And what you're referring to, Brian, the pledge is I come up with something called the philanthropy pledge, which is a giving pledge specifically for the personal finance world, which encourages people to think about giving money away and making a pledge and a public pledge. Because what I've realized is there are so many people in this community that give, but they're just not talking about it. So how beautiful is it to bring everyone together into a space and to show those powers in numbers? So the options are a trial pledge like I took. You could start with something as low as 1% of your income, and you could try that out for 6 months. So you could choose a time frame. By the way, if you make $120,000 a year after taxes, that's $1,200 a year. That's $100 a month. Very reasonable and doable. Maybe some of you are doing that already. So there's that trial pledge, and then you can take the classic 10% pledge. And then because we are the personal finance world, and a lot of us are thinking about money in terms of our portfolios versus our income, there's also a wealth pledge where you could choose a percent of your overall portfolio to donate, which sometimes that makes more sense for people when they're thinking about the math.
I love all of this. And I will, since we're having such an honest episode, the financial giving that I have done is from my sister's kids and, Claire's sister's kids when they're asking for help for their school project or some school fundraiser that they're doing. Let me just give you my quick background and why I'm like this, but I want to change, right? And so, we all know the stories or the concept of, I call it a money personality, but money stories, money histories, those sorts of things. And I think there's hope for me. Let me just do a quick aside, because you said you were not born into this type of family either. I was not either. My parents were just trying to make ends meet, and you save and you protect the family. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. And the very specific example I just so remember is we took this vacation, which we didn't take a ton of vacations, but we took one to Chicago. We lived in rural Wisconsin, and we got to go to this FAO Schwartz toy store on Michigan Avenue. It was incredible. And I just remember specifically coming out of there, and there was this woman and her kid begging for money. And my mom was like, do not give them anything because they'll probably just use it on drugs. And I'm like, okay, and like, that's the kind of like thought that I would always have, even when I went to school and I was walking on State Street at Madison and, people are asking for money. I'm like, no, no, no. Meanwhile, like my wife's sister is the most helpful person ever. She's going in and buying cheeseburgers and giving them to people. Anyway, all that to say, I felt like my money personality being raised was just protect your money. I'm great at investing and saving, and it's been really hard for me to figure out how to give. And I think I just didn't think of it,
Yeah.
That's why I'm just so fascinated by the concept in the story. And I know, because I know that I need to get better at
And
that.
Brian, I don't think you're alone. I think a lot of people would probably have, if they're willing to be vulnerable enough, share a
Yeah.
similar example to that from your past. I think the main issues and hurdles that we have with thinking about giving is that we tend to be very reactive, right? Like most people give when asked. That's
Mhm.
why the majority of donations happen during giving season every year,
Mhm.
because we are being asked by charities or being asked by someone on the street. It could be someone experiencing homelessness. It could be someone wearing a green vest, right?
Mhm.
That's when we give. My goal is to help others be more proactive in their giving. One, not only does it help you have a greater impact, two, it feels better, right? So you're not being motivated by just guilt,
Right.
which isn't a terrible thing to be motivated by guilt, but you're being motivated by more things than just that. And three, you have confidence in it, right? So the two hurdles that people typically face are where to donate, like where should I donate, which is a big question. And the other is how much. And kind of subpart of that is how am I going to do it, right? Like, am I going to do a monthly credit card donation? Am I going to donate
Mhm.
appreciated stock? Then all the personal finance questions come in. So I feel like in the personal finance world, we're talking about this micro element of like, what am I donating? Here are my tax deductions. But really the hardest thing is to whom and how
Yes.
much, and how do I budget for it, and how do I make space for it emotionally, financially, etc.
I want to ask you that question, where? But first, I just wanted to mention that you made me remember that when I was in my late 20s, we had an urban family, which was, because all of us were away from our main families. And one year for Christmas, instead of getting each other gifts, all did the Heifers International, I think it was, where we got the goats and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It felt so good. Like, I don't know. And I forgot how good that feels, you know? Because we did it proactively. But anyway, to pose back to you the question of like, where should people give? What do you usually recommend?
Right. So this isn't an obvious question, right? Because people give for different reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
People give because their families have some sort of relationship with something, because they've personally experienced loss or some sort of conflict. They give because they want to have the most impact possible. I kind of recommend a framework as follows, just like on a very meta level. When it comes to giving money away, and obviously you can give time, you can give your skills, but when I'm talking about money, the first bucket is for you and your loved ones. Okay. So that could be your kids,
Mm-hmm.
aging parents, people in your nearby family that you need to take care of. Maybe you have that, maybe you don't. The second bucket is emotional. So something that you feel emotionally connected to, personally connected to. And then the third bucket is impact oriented. So in that bucket are donations to organizations or causes that you sure as heck know are going to have a really, really positive impact. And so the idea is it's like a charitable diversification strategy. Hopefully buckets 2 and 3 overlap. Like the things you care about also have an impact. And I want to break down this term impact, right? So let's say someone comes up to you on the street and they're like, Brian, Kirby, for $50, you can buy this student in your local high school all the textbooks they need, and they won't have to worry about that expense. You might walk away from that and be like, I like kids. School is good. This person's asking me for money. That sounds like a good thing, right? Like, it doesn't sound like how much bad can come from that, right? It sounds good, right? You guys are shaking
Yeah.
your heads.
Yeah.
If I were to come back to this in an impact-oriented model, I would want to know, okay, how likely were those students to graduate from high school with those textbooks versus if they didn't have those textbooks? Are they more likely to show up for school? Are they more likely to graduate? Are they more likely to get into college or get better paying jobs? Are they more likely to have higher levels of income? And I know in this example, it kind of sounds crazy. This person was just asking for $50, but there are organizations out there that will tell you exactly what your $50 can do. And so the feel-good feelings of, oh, I just helped a student with their textbook, there's nothing wrong with that. But I encourage people to level up and to really understand what the impact of their dollars are having. And for me, when I think that way, it makes it so much easier to give away money, right? Because I'm like, oh, I know that donating $50 or $100 to this cause is saving this many lives, providing this many vaccines, providing this many meals so someone can live. That is it just makes it easier. So that's what speaks to me. For some people, they need their heartstrings to be pulled. You know, they need to like cry at a video or an ad. I need the data, I guess.
You're speaking to me because as an entrepreneur and into finances, you're looking at value, right? Where am I getting value? And so that's like a way that I approach the world. And you're basically telling me how to make sure that your charitable donation is getting the most value, which I think is awesome. And I don't mind some heartstrings being pulled either. You know, that I like
The
that too,
stories are important, right?
because I can cry at a commercial.
Yeah.
Anyway. So Rebecca, what are some resources that people could refer to help with their charitable giving?
Right. So there are so many charitable organizations out there. The first things first is you want to make sure that your charitable giving isn't a scam, right? 'Cause
True.
unfortunately, and this is what's creating that distrust, maybe, right, for what your parents shared with you. Like maybe they have been scammed in the past. So something like Charity Navigator is a really good option just to make sure that you're not being scammed. They have an evaluation scorecard, and they're evaluating all these organizations' 990 forms, so they can tell whether these organizations are and actually doing what they're meant to be doing. So that's a baseline, right? Like, let's not get scammed. In terms of impact-oriented organizations, there's a couple of resources that I really like. The first is The Life You Can Save, which is an organization founded by Peter Singer, who's one of those philosophers who deeply influenced me in this transition to more of a generous mindset. And this is a charity aggregator that's identified a number of charities that follow these steps. They report back effectiveness, and they tend to be cost-effective opportunities abroad to help people. But it's really not just about cost effectiveness as a measure. It's truly about like how many lives can we save. So The Life You Can Save is a great example. If you're more like climate conscious, we were talking about water and resources before we hopped on this call.
Yep.
If you're climate conscious, Giving Green is another one. If you're love animals, if you're a vegan, a vegetarian, an animal lover, Animal Charity Evaluators is another one that's focused on that space. Those are 3 great places to start. Even if you don't choose a charity from them, you get a very good sense of what should be reported back to you as the donor. So, for example, if you have a local organization that's maybe just a little too small to put out these numbers in terms of like, here's the exact impact we have, a la the textbook example, you at least then have a framework to say, these are the types of questions I can ask them in order to understand, like, do they have a sense of the impact that they're actually having outside of just wanting to do good? Because wanting to do good isn't necessarily the same thing as creating meaningful opportunities for others. So I'd recommend starting there. And Charity Navigator as well is a little bit more expansive than those last three I just mentioned. The Life You Can Save, Giving Green, Animal Charity Evaluator. They do have a more expansive list. So if you want to be able to look up your local charities, or if you want to be able to look up specific organizations, you can explore there too.
Thank you so much. So, Rebecca, I've loved our conversation on your financial independence journey, time freedom, and all of the resources that you gave around charitable giving. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people learn more about you and what you're working on?
So the easiest place to find me is at yieldandspread.org. So on my website, you can find the philanthropy pledge. We talked about taking the trial pledge or the 10% pledge or the wealth pledge. I also have a Learn to Invest course where all proceeds go to charity. I have a one-to-one coaching program. So if you are someone who's been thinking about donating, but you're kind of battling some things like a scarcity mindset or how is this going to impact my timeline to financial freedom, that is my specialty and that's what I work most intimately on. And then lastly, there's a bunch of free resources on there like calculators to help you understand if you were to donate 1% or 2% or 3%, how would that impact your timeline to financial independence? So those are all free and you can feel free to head there and check them out.
Great. Thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation and an important conversation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Kirby, that was a really cool conversation with Rebecca. Why is it that the most honest and authentic conversations turn out to be some of the best episodes?
Yes. I think because you're just authentic and you're just showing up as you, and not that we show up as somebody else
Well,
every
you
other
can
episode. And
get to the heart of the matter. You don't have to. Anyway, that's one of the things I valued from that conversation. Is she kind of just put it out there, and it actually encourages then the next person like myself to put yourself out there. But was there anything that stuck with you?
I think all of it was just so good. The one thing that really stuck with me and got my mind turning though is the difference between like wanting to do good and versus the actual change and the actual impact that a charity could have.
Yeah.
And knowing the understandings of like the inner workings. I loved her example of like, are you donating just to feel good, like the emotional side, or what's the true impact? And I think both of us want that deeper impact and we both want, lasting change. And by asking those questions that she was saying, you can do that more effectively.
I think that she is, well, you know how you say, like, it's easy to just teach a concept and everyone's like, okay, sure. Or you can tell a story and it really sticks. The example that she gave about donating the $50 for the textbooks was so helpful because at first I'm like, well, yeah, definitely I'd do that. But then when you start to think, well, how much of an impact will that actually make? It's a different frame through which you can look at that. That really stuck with me. Just her whole framework around how you give. I asked the question, so where should you give? It's kind of a naive question because she's like, well, what are your goals? And then we kind of laid that all out. But the one other thing that really stuck with me related to time freedom and financial freedom is how fluid it can be. Because, she is on podcasts saying that she achieved financial independence at 32. And then people think that's so binary. But now she's since moved to a more expensive city. And she's like, am I financially independent anymore? I'm pretty close, and I feel the same way in my own personal journey. Like it kind of ebbs and flows and you're around. I think the most important thing is if you can get to the point where you can feel comfortable, then you have more flexibility in how you choose to live, however that might be.
And it goes back to the whole, the cash river and not a savings mountain because
Yes.
you can't pinpoint that number. And for her, especially, she even mentioned that, it was this number and now she has kids and things have changed. And like you said, they're in a different city. Like it is just a flowing number. And so just another great reminder.
And I think also, again, why I really appreciated the episode is sometimes in these niche communities, you're like, are you or are you not? And then if you are financially independent, then you can never not be again. And I don't know, she was just so, hey, this is my personal situation. It's a little bit fluid and it is what it is. And I'm just trying to live the best life that I can of intention and trying to help the maximum number of people that I can while I'm alive and even after I die.
Yeah.
What a wonderful message. All right. So where should people go?
Like and subscribe
That's right. Don't forget.
on all the platforms and go see us at timefreedom.life.
Absolutely. And also, yeah, check us out on YouTube. Kirby prepares these really cool thumbnails. They're really fun and funny. And I love them. And nobody watches them. So go out there and watch them. We got to get our YouTube presence up. That's my ask of y'all. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next week. Hey, listeners of the podcast, I have a special deal for you. You can now pre-order my book, Time Freedom, if you go to the link timefreedombook.com. And my special is, normally, if you order 3 books, you can get the audiobook free immediately. If you put the promo code podcast, you can order 1 book at your favorite retailer, Amazon, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, wherever, and put your order number in the form, put the promo code podcast, and I'll immediately send you the audiobook for free right away. So you don't have to wait. Pre-order the hard copy book, get the audiobook free. Thank you so much for your support. timefreedombook.com.